That also brings us to the next slide. So more the risk-based approach, and I think we can give all the audience a practical tool in this sense. Maybe some tax teams already do it. Maybe others, to others, this is new. But with Coperitas in mind, I see, let's say, the following considerations resulting in a more of a TP calendar for 2022. So that's more of a schedule based on your risk appetite and abilities within your multinational, so within your tax team. So if you start on the right-hand side, the level of detail, I think if you want to make a TP calendar and you want to classify, let's say, deadlines, so you have 4 types of deadlines. When you have an actual filing, so we call it a hard deadline, you cannot miss. Maybe you have an obligation to have your transfer pricing documentation, but you do not have the obligation to file. But when the tax authorities request for your documentation, you have under 30 days. Then it depends on your organization whether that's viable or not to hand over the documentation within 30 days. Then you have the more loosened up deadline where you have more than 30 days. So sometimes you have 60 days. That should be enough to, let's say, finalize your documentation. And there's the 4th category where there's no deadline in the legislation, and there's no deadline given when the tax authorities request for it. But it states that you need to have your documentation. And
Mike, a question on this one.
Yeah.
So what I see also sometimes in practice is that companies sort of tend to focus on the deadline requirements.
Yeah.
While I think if you have a sort of proper system in place, that it doesn't take you a lot of effort to create local files for each entity. If you use a software solution and you have sort of a automated data system in that software solution. What are your thoughts in that respect on the deadline management part?
Yeah, I think what I experience is when people handling their TP compliance on the what I call the old-fashioned way with Word and Excel, then they're really focused on these hard deadlines, as you're also stating, Michael. And when you're working with a automation software which can, let's say, duplicate your local files over the countries based on the data which is incorporated in the tool, then it's, let's say, more or less a click of a button to generate a already base type of local file for such country. And then you'll see that most of the deadlines will be met, and that it's more easy to just tackle all the local files at once than focusing on those deadlines and starting the process just, let's say, 4 weeks before the deadline. So I think the people gets more of an enabler with the software, where deadlines are more on the background. And I think that in the past, TP documentation was more seen as a project. So then it's very deadline focused when you do a project. When you make it a process, then you can, let's say, have a bit less focus to it because you know it's going to happen. And that's also an enabler of the software.
Yeah, I think it also gives sort of peace of mind that you don't have to think about deadlines, but just make sure everything is arranged and don't have to think about it anymore, and just don't get in that firefighting situation that you are almost with the deadline and then have to do something.
Yeah. And I also think just walk you through this 4 piece. When we go to the right side, level of detail, you can also, what you've already stated, opt for, let's say, more of a high level approach, or when you decide to go in full detail because your risk appetite's requiring you to opt for penalty protection, for example. Those are choices you can make. The more high level you keep it, the more it's viable for automation, of course. Then you have the second step, resources. You need to make a distinction between outsourcing and insourcing. And this is mostly chosen between if there's time available within the organization, or if there are large budgets available to, let's say, outsource the compliance work. And I think what's mostly overlooked is knowledge. You can have the time of the world, but if there's no knowledge about the, let's say, transfer pricing technicalities in a TP document, then you still need to outsource a bit of the documentation. But when you have quite some knowledge in-house, you can perform the TP documentation process, of course, and then, let's say, do a final review. Those are the choices you can make. And finally, deadline management is also choosing a software package which supports you meeting those deadlines.
Yeah, and I think maybe on the knowledge part and the resources part, Mike, I think typically perhaps companies tend to think like, well, I have to outsource or insource, but I think also because as Quantera we are independent and we are a niche company, and we can sort of help the clients in the way that we think is most appropriate and also most fun to do, so to say. There I think you see a sort of development that companies also ask us for example, just to do a review in the first year, for example, or an incidental review, or just a couple of countries, and that you then sort of add the knowledge of us to those to that local file initially, and to that perhaps the selection of local files, and that you then sort of create a sort of optimum between obtaining the knowledge externally and making use of your resources internally as well. Maybe one.
And I also think, Maikel, there's a efficiency there. If you let's say, one local file reviewed by a TP expert, and you use a software which also uses the same part of that local file to create the other local files, then you in the end have, with one review, also covered the other local files. So it could be very efficient as well.
Yeah, maybe one question also on the level of detail, Mike. So I think it's sort of common sense. The more detail, the more time you may have to spend on preparing the documentation. And sort of my own experience with Coperitas, I think the benefit of using that is also that you can sort of have, for example, for the local file Italy, or for the local file Poland, or whatever, you can sort of include a separate paragraph or a separate text block, and then all the remainder of the local file stays the same, but you just add that text block at once, and then also in the subsequent year it's still that text block is added, and perhaps you have to make some changes to it or not. But then I think also that is sort of relatively manageable and still perhaps less time consuming than you would initially think.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, you can also only let people experience that, I think. And that's also when you send out a local file to your local colleague, they want to read it all. And with a decent software solution, you can, let's say, let only review the parts you've added. So I think that's more efficient. Yeah. So thank you, Maikel, for questioning this this overview. I think it gives more insight to the audience as well, and this is also a good starting point. If you tackle those 4 attention points, I think everyone should be able to set up their TP calendar for 2022, if you're not already done that. Maybe going to the considerations, why automation? There are a couple of things to consider. There are a lot of multinationals which outsource, let's say, TP documentation and compliance maintenance to local advisors. I've come across a couple of cases where multinationals paid double, let's say for benchmark studies or to update local files which were reviewed by local advisors. I think when you set up a decent automation tool, you can save on those local advisors. You can do more work in-house with the same amount of time you're currently spending. I also think that then you can spend your budget to TP reviews to the local advisors, so that's more value added work for you. So you're saving up on the copy paste work essentially. I also think that it frees up time to do other value added work because mostly I experience junior people working in the company almost full time on compliance. I think if you free up work or can free up time for them, they could also focus on other things to learn and yeah, let's say add more value to the company as a whole. And there's another thing, you prevent, let's say, also finger pointing. If you have a decentralized organization, what I usually see is that HQ is pointing towards the responsibilities of local to, let's say, draft the local file and maintain the local file, while the local people point fingers to HQ that they're responsible for TP compliance. So in the end, or there is a document which is not in line with the master file, which is usually made on the HQ level, or there is no document at all. And I think if you set up an automation tool, you can have documentation, yeah, let's say, to cover your global compliance to a certain level, which is in line with your risk appetite. And the latest consideration why to choose for automation is also less key dependency. To get back to that junior position, if you work, let's say, 2 or 3 years only drafting documentation and always the same documents, asking people for information, waiting, I think there's no fun in work anymore for them at a certain point, and they will leave the company with all the knowledge included about the TP documentation. So if you embed that process into a transfer pricing tool, you're less key dependent on those persons. And in the end, I also think it benefits that those people, yeah, let's say, have more fun in their work working with the automation software, because I think it's not of this time to work with Word and Excel only anymore. So people will stay at the company longer. Then to make the switch to Coperitas, what do we offer as a transfer pricing software solution? We've built a TP solution that's very flexible. And we did that in mind that you can, let's say, continue on the storyline you already have created. You can decide upon your own which information you would like to include and which you do not like to include. So there's not a standard format to deliver the information in. You decide, so you're a bit behind the steering wheel. Also, it's so flexible that it can also cover other parts of TP compliance. So if you look into DAC6, CBCR, maybe also TP policies can be created with the documenter. It's more broad than only TP documentation, local files and master files, for which we see a lot of competitors do in the market. So it's more of a broader tool. Then we focused on a... yeah, please proceed.
You also see that people use it for very different use cases than transfer price?
Yeah, that's also one of the characteristics. It also embeds a legal platform in it. So what you usually see within an organization, you have silos, finance, legal, and tax. And our solution is also used within the legal and finance department. And even, let's say, just to give a practical example, you can also create, let's say, financial statements with it. If you already have the information in the tool for your transfer pricing purposes, it's just a combination of text and financial information, which combines it into, let's say, your text note. So those are examples. You can also use Coperitas in more broader setup. And that also makes it a sustainable solution, I think. If what we've already talked about, Michael, is that there's getting more and more to the TP compliance table, or the puzzle, so to say, and our solution is such flexible that you can tackle, let's say, any of those challenges. And I think it's sustainable when your company grows. More challenges comes around the corner, so you can tackle those as well with the same software solution. And the fourth one, I think it's very important to have a central professional work environment. What we usually see, finance and legal has very fancy software solutions and also very costly solutions. And I think it's a bit underwhelmed that tax has Microsoft Office in essence. And I think it could be a better investment for tax as well to get good solutions as well to support them, which also results in people staying within the company. And the last one, I think, which you can achieve with automation, if you free up time on your compliance, you can invest it in, let's say, obtaining more control. Also invest time in monitoring of your transfer pricing, let's say margins, or even take a step back to look into what you're currently working on and if that's the right way to go. So I think there are a lot of pros to it, and I think it's worth considering. Do you have anything to add, Michael, to this one?
Yeah, so more my personal experience is that it so where in the past, for example, if for a client I would have to prepare 20 local files, I would have to sort of review each local file page by page, because could be that the junior perhaps made a mistake in copying some changes or etc. So that was sort of time consuming and not the most fun work to do. While now when we use Coperitas, it's just that I sort of check the text blocks and sort of scan through it whether the text blocks are correct, but basically they always are. And then you don't have to check word by word whether everything is solid. And also the financials are uploaded automatically, so you can basically check the Excel sheet whether the financials are correct, and when they are uploaded automatically, then you don't have to do all the double checking anymore. So that saves a lot of time and also makes, I think, life more easy. So.
Yeah, and I think that's also a good one to highlight. And Coperitas is not only for the tax teams itself, it's also working at a transfer pricing professional. So if you want to gain a competitive advantage, then there's a solution for it as well. So time savings, and that also results in cost savings for your clients and focusing on the more value added work. Thank you. Then I have more of a funny picture. Try not to laugh at this one. I always get the question, when's the right timing to start, or is there a right timing? And this picture illustrates an issue I see during many conversations with tax teams. So assume that this card represents your compliance burden every year, and it needs to be towed by 1 or 2 people due to these square wheels, which represent Microsoft Word and Excel. It's very time consuming. And as long as you're with 2 people, it's fine. maybe just fine. It's on the edge of being not fine at all, but okay. It gets there to the finish line. And when the front man leaves the company, the cart gets stuck. So you're not strong enough to get that cart to the finish line. So you know it's a risk, even though you also know that the cart gets heavier and heavier every year, as we saw with the puzzle. And the thing I mostly experience is that there are a lot of excuses not to start with a automation project because people are busy. We've always done it this way, so we keep doing it this way. And nowadays, I know there are a lot of changes in the world, also with companies transforming ERP systems to, let's say, the cloud solutions. When looking, let's say, to SAP, S/4HANA, it all costs a lot of work. But I think the decision about TP automation does not have to take a lot of time of your team, and the choice for Coperitas also enables you to not have to wait for the ERP transformation, as an example. We've made it in such flexible way that when the ERP system changes, the connection with your ERP system changes with it. So you do not have to wait after the transformation, which could take up a couple of years for it to work, of course. And then also my message is, if you change nothing will change, of course, and don't wait, because the time will never be just right to make a change.
Yeah, and I think maybe to add here, Mike, I think also the hurdle in the implementation phase that takes a bit more time. I think also the cooperation between Coperitas and Quantera is nice in this example, because we have, of course, the people to take away that hurdle, and what we see often is that we document the first year for a company within Coperitas ourselves, and that they then start licensing Coperitas and perform it themselves, but then they have already all the documentation included in the software solution. And that is also what I sometimes hear back when I talk to people that, for example, decided on a different solution, that they decided on it, for example, a year ago, but then they are still not using it. That's of course a bit of a shame if you pay license fees and you don't at the time to use it. So.
Yeah, so if I understand you correctly, Michael, you're saying that changing these wheels from square to round is just as fast as the F1, if you're doing it throughout the year?
As the Formula One. Well,
yes. So
yeah,
you do not even notice it.
No, for a client, if and doesn't, because usually they already have documentation, so it wouldn't have to take a lot of time from either the Coperitas employees or Quantera employees. So I think that it probably only saves them time. And then moving onwards, if you take a 3-year look, or then it also saves a lot of costs. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Maybe to do some business cases, we'll keep these short. So what I've seen at clients, the most common one, I think, is reduction in TP documentation efforts. I think the biggest achievement was for a company which is active in 40 countries, which handled their TP documentation in 3 months before they used the Coperitas tool. They did use a tool in the past, but it was more of a, let's say, collaboration tool in Word, where they still needed to, let's say, do a lot of input, do a lot of calculations with the financials. So there was no really automation to it. And we managed to automate the whole financial side of the documentation. And they only need to let it checked by the TP advisor. They stayed with their trusted advisor, and they nowadays complete it within 3 weeks. So I think it's a huge performance step up. And it also has to deal with, let's say, the level of detail, of course, you want to achieve. I think in the second case, I've heard someone telling me a year ago, sorry, Mike, I have no time to implement the Coperitas software because I have no time, I have no internal resources regarding time of colleagues, so I'll outsource it to an advisor. And in the end, last month they came back. I asked them how it went, if they were happy, and he told me, no, I was not, because I felt like I get 10 times more the questions. I need to, let's say, source it from my own organization to get the information and then give it back to the advisor. So it costed a lot of time in the end. And Maikel, I don't know, do you also experience that clients feel, let's say, more of a handover person between the company and you as an advisor?
Yeah, so what we usually do is that we also think along with the company, like what data is available and how they can sort of manage the process up front, instead of just asking them questions. I think that's not really helping them. Of course, some questions also need to be raised, but I think it helps to think out the process together with them and see what suits them. And also that's of course a balance between what data is available, how can it sort of be semi or automated to gather that data, what data is required for the documentation, what data is helpful, and yeah, and then you also see indeed also speak to sort of prospects. Let's say that they are really busy with sort of that they get questions from all local advisors, and then sort of have to then raise that question back to the local colleague they have, and then they are sort of have a function as middleman instead of being a tax professional. That they tend to like that.
Yeah, I think the experiences are quite similar. And I truly believe in more of a joint solution where the advisory takes into account the situation of the multinational, and sometimes takes a step back from, let's say, their ideal world, but then takes a further look into the company, how things work out, what's best for them, instead of what's best for the end document itself. And also that's a balancing act, of course. And then the third case, I think it's also more of a misconception. Most times where very, let's say, young companies, scale-ups, are very hesitant to step into automation software because they think that if you do not have a, let's say, base case of TP documentation, that there's no efficiency to gain with transfer pricing software. And I think that's the beauty of, let's say, Coperitas, that it's such flexible. You can set up with a advisor an environment where you can directly create your TP documentation in the tool itself. So you do not need to, let's say, bounce forth and back a Word document, but you directly work into a software environment, which saves you on the implementation, of course. And then after, let's say, a couple of months, you're set up with your first set of documentation. And I think it's very efficient and effective to do it that way. And then you need just a pragmatic TP advisor, which is also very confident to work with software themselves. If there's nothing